Welcome back for another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. I'm your host. Today's episode with Dr. William Curran deals with social work and the needs of clients with prenatal alcohol exposure and how people like myself can better serve them, and what are those issues within the field of social work that makes it hard for providers like us to do so. Our guest, Dr. Curran, has put so much thought into this. He understands it well from all the time he has spent on the front lines. He's going to be talking to us about that and all the other goodies that he shares also as a social work professor. So join us for a candid conversation. Dr. William Curran, welcome to Living with FASD. I am so honored to have you join me on the program today. I've been seeing your name and reading your posts on LinkedIn for a couple years now, and just really enjoying everything that you're saying. Before anything else I've done professionally, I was a social worker. And so, yeah, I think we have so much in common, and there's so many joys and sorrows and frustrations that we need to share with everybody when it comes to frustrations that parents have with the system, frustrations that anybody has. And so with that, I would just love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and let them know what all you do, how you're working in the field, and that kind of thing. So welcome.
Thank you, Patti. And again, it's quite a privilege to kind of join you in today in this podcast. And thank you for your kind words about my kind of posts on LinkedIn or whatever. But I guess, firstly, I want to clarify to the listener that I am William. I moved to North America now 8 years in total, but I had to kind of pick up on where my passport was. And my passport is William, but they may know me or may have read me under Liam, because Liam is the Gaelic of William as well. So I have some publications that are under Liam and some are under William, and people are a little confused. Is it the same person? But it is.
Well, just pretend you have multiple personality. That's all.
Well, yeah, I think many people think I do have, but no, it's just one of those foibles of Irish culture, that they will often baptize you one thing and call you something else.
Yeah.
And so that's a real problem in today's immigration world and stuff, you know. Yeah. But anyway, just a little background, I suppose. I've been treading the boards of fetal alcohol now since, I'm going to go back to 2007. I accidentally fell into it. As a practitioner in Yorkshire in England, I had a very complex pre-birth risk assessment. And that pre-birth risk assessment got to do with illicit drugs, etc. And I can remember the gynecologist, we were very, very, very unusually to get an obs-and-gynae person to a case conference, but she talked about the internal world of this fetus and this child. Mm-hmm. And it really was a light bulb moment for me, because I think in social work, we are very focused on the external world. Yes. of the domestic violence, of the addiction, of all of these external factors that we say affects a child's development.
Adverse childhood experiences.
Oh yeah, and everything is trauma and ACEs, etc.
Poverty.
Yeah. But it all happens post-birth.
Right.
And this was kind of my thinking in this pre-birth risk assessment, thinking, well, maybe something is going on before that.
Yeah.
And so that was why I went into Trinity College in Dublin, and I asked, the question of my master's thesis was, is drug and alcohol use a child protection concern? Mm-hmm. And so that got, strangely enough, and this is where it all went kind of pear-shaped for me, because it was taken up by the Society for Knowledge in Ireland, and suddenly it was on social media. I got an email from Latin America asking could they publish it, and I'm thinking, okay. So it got a little bit crazy, and so But also I had potentially opened a can of worms in Irish culture. This wasn't talked about. And so I continued on and I did various little publications and research. I came to the University of Wisconsin in 2011 and went on a program for the CDC as a certified educator of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
Okay.
And with that certification, I have been training in Europe for many years prior to the PhD. I did CPD for social work in Ireland, in UK, in Poland, in Spain.
So when you say CPD, you're talking about doing clinical education at post-grad education hours for people?
Oh yeah, I apologize. CPD is continuing professional development in the European context.
Yeah.
And they were full days of education, full days training. So I did sort of the biology of risk, et cetera, because it's all laid down in a CDC program.
Yeah.
And really, I suppose I got to a point then I'm thinking, I was working a lot with caregivers, with foster parents, with adoptive parents, but I was working with social workers as well. And I was hearing a kind of universal complaint that they were all struggling. Both carers and social workers were struggling. That the system was just not engaging. The system was just not acknowledging that this was an issue. And so that was what really took me into the PhD. And again, I suppose, like, you know, I'm a qualitative researcher because my master's was qualitative and my PhD is qualitative. I go to the front line and I ask the front line, what do you think of this fetal alcohol thing?
Yeah.
And the data certainly for my doctoral study was quite explosive. There was a lot of it I couldn't use because it was too explosive. Because frontline practitioners, they know they're dealing with this. They know they have a problem, but they have their hands tied because they don't have a pathway and a place to take these cases when they happen. And so that was the essence of going in to do the PhD, was to kind of to look at the system and to ask the system, why aren't you providing a pathway for these cases? Because again, I'm seeing the carers struggling, I'm seeing the adoptive parents struggling, I'm seeing the social workers struggling. Now in Europe,
and the children,
and the children, of course. I'm sorry, but again, I suppose when you're my training and stuff as allied health, I'm looking at the professional piece rather than, you know, there's a lot of research out there around the needs of children, around the issues that are impacting children, et cetera, and I'm well aware of all that research. But I guess a lot of my focus over the years has been allied health professionals, foster parents, adoptive parents, because again, I suppose we come back to this thing that there's a very heavy focus on diagnosis. My experience in talking to carers, both pre and post diagnosis, is that the diagnosis doesn't address needs. And so I've actually had a caregiver rip up a diagnosis because she found that the diagnosis was becoming a barrier to accessing services. And that was better to take the child and say ADHD or autism or something to get services. So in cultures where FSD is still poorly understood, the issue of diagnosing children into that abyss of no knowledge, no professional knowledge, etc., has to be questionable, you know, because I've just seen the carers struggle.
Yeah.
I would say in the latter part now, post PhD, I've been doing, I think I talked to you a little bit about functional assessments, because in my PhD, I brought forward this 5-step model. The 5-step model was really focused on child welfare, and it was focused on the data in my study was very clear that they were looking for a pathway. They wanted a pathway. And the 5-step model is the best I could offer as a pathway for social work. The problem, Patti, you would know, social workers aren't their own masters. Yeah?
Yeah.
So the corporate leader or the corporate parent, as we call them in Europe, ultimately they need to provide that pathway. And if a social worker, say, was reading my paper, the caption invisible, and saying, yeah, I think that could work, they have to push that up the line, because it's the corporate need and the corporate issue that's at play.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's a long-winded bit about me. I'm sorry, I went on and on.
No, you're fine, because I mean, that's exactly where I wanted to head, was about your model.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head. As social workers, we are not masters of our caseload.
No.
And, when I was in California, I worked for 25 years in child welfare for a private nonprofit, well, actually, a couple private nonprofit foster care agencies that would contract with the local county to do the routine day-to-day oversight of kids and their families. So they would certify foster parents, foster carers, oversee their training, that kind of thing, oversee the welfare of the kids, but always report to the county worker. Agency social workers always feel second class to the county social workers, who had more power and more say so. But when I really got into FASD, I would have wonderful interactions with various individual county social workers who always wanted to know more, but their hands were tied in terms of implementing any of the approaches, because they had to follow their protocols.
Yeah.
And, part of me, always part of being a social worker is having both a micro lens and a macro lens. Part of me cannot help but think, on the macro level, gosh, how would I feel if I were the administrator over a county system and I was the one that was saying things have to be done this, thus, and thus, right? And I was the one saying, no, we're not going to go down this path. If I ever did face the challenges or the voids, the gaps in service that blindness created, that would be very challenging to look in the mirror and realize thousands of kids and families have been underserved.
Yeah, but
or
I
even
do.
harmed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how that takes a lot of courage,
Yeah.
and just on my level, I think of how I counseled parents 8, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and it makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Right?
But coming back to the fact of the administrator over child welfare system, or the corporate parent, say in Europe now, the corporate leaders of child welfare system. I think it's important though, and this again is where we're struggling, because I think if we are too top heavy on the diagnostic mantra, then that's going to influence the corporate leaders, and they might feel they have no options and nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Again, that was really where I came in, because I think it was 2019, Pavova and Bird published a paper called Fixing Our Aim. And in that, they acknowledge that child welfare system cannot diagnose all of the children that are presenting on their books with potential fetal alcohol. And I think, again, if child welfare system or the corporate leader is getting drowned out by diagnose, then they're obviously backing themselves into a corner, because they know we can't do that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, like the diagnosis cost is never talked about, but I know it was in Canada when I was doing my PhD, it was $4,400 a diagnosis. Yeah. Now, if a child welfare official is looking at their system and they've got, I don't know, 8,000 kids in the system, and then they're reading the prevalence studies that says you could have 25% of this could be impacted by fetal alcohol, then they're obviously going to panic because they can't diagnose that.
Yeah.
This again is where my work, being very focused on child welfare, the 5-step model, I'm going to be honest with you, Patti, I've had some kickback because diagnosis is step 6. Yeah. Because I'm wanting the system to pick these kids up before the diagnosis.
Yes.
The more severe cases or whatever, and if a diagnosis is appropriate and it can help the families to access service, then great. But if you are looking at this cohort, this vulnerable cohort in child welfare system and applying functional assessments, you're better focusing on the needs of these kids. Yeah. And that's what I see in the results of the assessments I do.
Yeah.
But even the assessments I do here now in my locality, or you know, I've done some social virtually, but in the locality, I've gone into school meetings for IEP with the results of an adaptive functioning and executive functioning. And I talk about this child having a diagnosis of NDPAE. The school look at me a little bit funnily and they say, what? Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
They're completely off. And then I think one of the challenges of my functional assessments, though, is that the school look and realize that, oh, we can't really ignore this because it's in black and white.
Yeah.
And this is what I say to caregivers, that you are to buy into the concept of functional assessments, because it is black and white. It is something that you can go and argue with. And the schools or the juvenile justice or wherever cannot then dismiss this because it's down in paper. And I think that coming back to the fact that that is what child welfare needs to be looking at. Yeah. I believe as a better lens to look down the kind of social model of disability, to look at the functional assessment approach. There will be kids that maybe need a diagnosis or it is appropriate, but the vast majority just need needs. They have needs.
Yeah.
And we talk in social work in Europe anyway of a needs-led assessment. And that's where the concept of the 5-step was really focused on child welfare and the corporate leader, and to say, listen, you don't have to diagnose everybody, but you do have to assess everybody.
Yeah. And truly that's best practice, right? That every service would be specifically tailored to that individual's needs.
Yes.
You know, when it comes to FASD, I was trained with the neurobehavioral model by FASDs, right? Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Consultation Education Training Services. They now go by FASD's Center for Neurodiversity. And they look at the 9 categories of primary characteristics, and then they look at secondary symptoms and tertiary symptoms. And they point out that there's no set of, all the things that they ask the person or the parent to rate, they're things that everybody does. It's a matter of how often or how detrimental is the impact of it. So it's needs driven, and they're very clear with, you don't need an assessment to start parenting that way.
Yeah.
Or working with your client in that way. And all kids will benefit from a neurobehavioral approach. So I am wholeheartedly with you on that. I will say that, I think I'm privileged insofar as I was never identified until I was in facets, and realizing all the, many of the things that we were talking about with those primary characteristics, and even some of the secondary and tertiary stuff described my background. And so that sent me off talking with my mom, right? Getting that confirmation of daily alcohol exposure. It was several years before I got a diagnosis, which was NDPAE. But I say I'm fortunate insofar as I I managed into my 50s. I was 56 before I self-identified. So I'm fortunate in terms of I have lived a life, but I will say that proper identification was very powerful decades after the fact because it helped me reframe all those needs that had been problematic for me. It helped me reframe it in a way that fit. It gave me explanations that fit for the first time.
Sure.
And did diagnosis change anything? It didn't change any of the events or any of the relational dynamics or anything like that. Didn't change the past, but in being able to reframe things, it definitely changed the present and future.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The ability to give self-grace. So I think I come from this this and that, right? All of the above. We need it all. And and it really can be somewhat overwhelming, don't you think? And how vast are the things that we can address to move the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, but I think, Patti, and as you say, that you managed successfully into your 50s, etc. Little quirks, whatever, maybe as you were growing up, but you qualified as a social worker, you worked for many years, etc., etc. But so I think, again, what we've lost in this discourse as well is that FASD is a spectrum, and it's from mild to severe. And I think my concern again is that the child welfare system is picking up a lot of moderate to severe cases of fetal alcohol. They're not adoptable, they're not fosterable, they're in the group homes, they're in the residential care system, they're in the alternative care system. I mean, I suppose that, because of the invisibility of it, that over 90% of them will have no visible feature. Right. They may look very normal, but they will have this brain anomaly where the impairment is causing them difficulty. Yeah. Now, I think a classic example for the listeners of society deciding that this is not much of a problem, it's only a small problem, because we're not going to acknowledge the invisibility of it. I think a classic example was the Florida school shooting with Nicholas Cruz in 2018. Now, I think most people are aware of that. Now, I was just finishing my PhD at the time, or no, I was in my last year, and I was sitting here in the US, and I was watching the news, and I seen FASD on the news, and I'm thinking, oh my God. Yeah. Suddenly it's mainstreamed. It's kind of, my difficulty with society, and again, that the red flags in Nicholas's life were many red flags.
They were everywhere.
They were everywhere. Yeah. The DCYF was involved in 2016. That was 2 years before. Yeah. His adoptive parents were crying out for help and support, but they were getting nowhere. Yeah. Now, Nicholas wasn't diagnosed. Nicholas was diagnosed during the trial by Ken Jones, and he described it as one of the most severe cases of fetal alcohol exposure. Yeah.
He was the poster child of everything that can go wrong when someone is not identified.
Yes.
And not supported.
Think the problem, but again, I think it goes back to this thing that we've got to kind of bring the conversation back to this is mild to severe. There are different rates and different levels within that. Yeah. And I think we know that these kids are ending up in the juvenile justice system. We know they're ending up in tragedies around the world. I ask people, and I've put out a call asking caregivers not to read my doctoral study, because I think there's 6 public health coroner reports. And quite often they were children diagnosed and returned to the system, but the system did nothing with them. Yeah. And so, I do say there is a line in my thesis asking child welfare system to read the coroner reports listed in the bibliography, because the public health coroners are clearly saying to child welfare system, you need to address this. You need to get, now that's why I'm saying that my thesis is more on the severe end, and it's not for caregivers. I wrote that little book in 2014 called Understanding Fetal Alcohol, a guide for carers, parents, professionals. That was published in Dublin by one of the Irish members of the Irish Senate in Dublin in 2014. It was for Irish foster carers. I was writing for Ireland at the time. Many Irish foster carers have bought that, and there's a lot of pragmatics in it because I co-authored it with a foster parent from the UK. So again, I come back, and that's under that was for foster carers. I'm saying that my thesis is really looking at the system, and it's really for corporate leaders, so that they can, because I'm the first to admit it's hard hitting. It's a hard document to read. Yeah. And also I'm a grounded theorist. Most people don't understand grounded theory, but in grounded theory, you choose phrases or terms to help the reader to visualize. Yeah. So there's quite a number of terms in there that might upset people, but because they're not really understanding grounded theory. But at the same time, again, there's a statement in there saying, I kind of class child welfare with the Cinderella syndrome before the fairy godmother, that they're downstairs, they're doing the scrubbing, they're doing the heavy lifting, while others swoon upstairs. Yeah. And they need to kind of stop being subservient. Yeah. There is a lot of social work advocates in this world. There's social work profs around the world that are writing for the system and writing for social work. And I think clearly that social work and practitioners need to kind of engage with their social work leaders in the field to maybe get a better handle on what is going on in fetal alcohol. I think I'm often remembered of one of the best service structures that I'm aware of in the world now is the province of Alberta in Canada. And at the last I looked at, I think they had 24 multi-D assessment centers for a population of 5.4 million, I think. I probably got that wrong, the population, but so around 5 million. What again, most people wouldn't recognize there is that it was in the early 90s, social workers and foster carers came together and they wrote their competing needs, because they were competing. Social worker had one, the foster care, and they wrote them to their MLAs, their member of the, and that brought around, that was 1992. And that has brought around one of the best service structures now in the world, because foster carers, social workers club together. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say again, foster care, social workers, adoptive parents, to club together and to kind of get child welfare.
And drove the change.
The change. Yeah. So I think that is a good example of where it worked. And I think, unfortunately, in my own culture now in Ireland and indeed in Europe, I think we have not got one multidisciplinary assessment center. Nothing acknowledged that I can see. I know that, again, some people might read me and realize that Ireland has one of the highest alcohol rates in pregnancy at 82%. I didn't write that. The epidemiologist wrote that and published it. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, and I think Shear in Scotland published in 2020, and he talked about joining the dots, that we should join the dots. And certainly one of the big dot joiners is reading your epidemiologists and what they're saying about the alcohol rates in pregnancy to understand what the potential impact is on your child welfare system. Yeah. Those are clear dots that need to be linked.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there are the biological and neurological challenges, right? The very real physical challenges. Behavioral is just stems from those physical and neurological changes. Yeah. But they are made worse by all the adverse childhood experiences that come along with the families that are so often served by the child welfare system.
Oh, absolutely.
Heaping trauma upon trauma.
Yeah.
So it is the more severe end of that spectrum.
Yeah.
I think another challenge to getting it properly recognized is that there's wide variance in the numbers of kids that it does affect. Depending on the studies that you look at, there are those that say it is 70, a conservative figure is 70% of
Yeah.
kids in care are affected by prenatal alcohol exposure, whether or not that rises to the level of being able to diagnose them.
Yeah.
And then you look at CWLA, Child Welfare League of America stats saying that 95% of kids in care are there because of parental substance abuse. I
Yeah.
think back to where I first served career wise after graduation was in substance abuse,
Yeah.
alcohol and drug counseling. And I did not have a single client who used drugs, who did not also drink.
Yeah.
But the drinking is so underreported because it's legal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
then when we're talking about pregnant women going in for childbirth, we still have midwives, we still have doctors, we still have nurses who will say, well, if it will keep you calm compared to chronic high levels of maternal stress, yeah, have that one glass at dinner.
I think the other issue there, Patty, as well, is that the misbelief that the third trimester is safe. That is a major, major misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Whereas I would come from it, from my research and stuff, to say that the third semester has the highest risk because it's when the brain is formulating those fibers, those neurons are connecting.
Mm-hmm.
It's when alcohol as a teratogen does the damage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that message about the third trimester being safe is wrong, just wrong.
Yeah. And yet there's a competing narrative that is equally wrong that says drink until it's pink.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay to drink until pregnancy is confirmed. But we know that that's not true either.
No.
You know, if you have, I think it was Dr. Susan Rich on my show one time, I think in season 1, who said that even if you have one alcohol intensive cocktail, like a Long Island iced tea, which is 6 shots of liquor, or an Alabama Slammer that's got 7 shots, if that's the only drink during the whole 9 months, if that was during days 17 through 21, you can end up with full FAS.
Yeah.
You know,
No,
there's,
I think
yeah,
it's Russian roulette, and
yes,
and
that's a beautiful way of putting it.
it is Russian roulette. There's no
Yeah,
known safe level. There's no known safe time. I mean,
yeah,
I would have talked about my trainings in Europe that I would have broken down into kind of trying to people to understand. I'm saying when a fetus is born as a baby, it sleeps, wakes, and eats.
mm-hmm.
It does the same while it's in utero. And maybe if the fetus is in a feeding stage while that Long Island tea is going down, or when the Alabama, what did you call it? The
Alabama Slammer.
Alabama Slammer.
Yeah,
If the fetus is in a feeding stage at that point, because again, what we know is that we as adults can take on alcohol and we can process it, and our liver processes it. And when we go to the bar or whatever, we spend a lot of time in the loo because we're processing out the alcohol.
yes,
Yeah. But a fetus hasn't got its organs developed and it's not able to process.
right,
And
right.
therefore the alcohol sits and it does damage.
Even though the liver comes on board late in the first month,
Yeah.
the enzyme that does the processing doesn't come on until the 8th month.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for ADH, when it first makes its appearance, it's in the brain, the fetal
Yeah.
brain,
Yeah.
not in the liver. It kind of migrates down to the liver late in the 8th month. So when it does start processing alcohol, it's up in the brain, turning that alcohol into an IED.
Yeah. No, definitely. And and the evidence is there. I mean,
Yeah.
we are drowning in the evidence of the scientific evidence regarding that,
Yeah.
but I think, again, there's a cultural fear addressing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting. When I was doing my PhD in Canada, I was living in Montreal, and I would regularly see on the pavement the little slips out of a cigarette packet, which was that smoking can. It was all cigarette packets had a little removable slip that kind of said, and it gave all the reasons what smoking can do in pregnancy. And I was always struck by this, thinking, wow, we can do it so well for smoking.
Yeah.
But we don't do it for alcohol.
Yeah.
Now, you may or may not be aware, but my culture is currently in a frenzy around putting the little label on alcohol drinks. Mm-hmm. We have conscientious objectors to doing that. Now, the US has been doing that since 1996 or 86, I think, since the Surgeon General kind of put that out. But we're still struggling at that level. But then, of course, I look at the debate in my culture and I think, do they think that that's going to solve the problem?
Yeah.
Because prevention of fetal alcohol is multi-layered. It's multi-layered. Yeah. I've co-delivered training with birth moms in Europe, and I heard their story. I'm thinking of one specifically because she was in an abusive domestic violence situation. He isolated her from her family. Mm-hmm. She drank for comfort in her marriage because of the abuse she was suffering. But she ended up with 2 children with fetal alcohol as a result. Do you blame that mom when she's been coerced and she's been beaten and she's been isolated from her family? So I do feel for birth moms, and as I have co-delivered alongside them. The European Birth Mom Network was set up to try and support birth moms. Mm-hmm. Again, it comes back to, Patti, these are the challenges of social work on the front line. How does social work intervene? How does social work talk to a birth around her alcohol use? Where is the ethical practice? Where is the ethics of fetal alcohol when you're dealing with those issues? This is, again, where I come back to the fact, in my old life, I used to deliver full-day trainings, and quite often they would be evaluated as needing 2 days, because this is a massively, massively complex area. Yeah. And it's certainly complex on the front line of child protection and child welfare. Yeah. So again, if the system is not going to endorse the need of professional, and I call it professional education. It's not awareness education. We know that. We need skill-based. We need ethics. We need scientific understanding. Because the other issue I'll say to you, Patti, and you will probably know this, I kind of fear there's a gender issue in the front line of child welfare in terms of fetal alcohol, because the vast majority of social workers on the front line are female. And therefore, this issue has to be resolved, has to be understood by the professional themselves. Yeah. Because they are moms, they are adults having the drinks, whatever. They may worry that they had a drink when they're pregnant and therefore, oh my God, is that what's wrong with my kid? I'm not sure. So again, that whole gender issue of trying to get female social workers. Now, my last CPD day was 24 female social workers and 2 male. Mm-hmm. And they were wonderfully receptive to that training. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I do believe that, again, child welfare system needs to consider that issue of gender in trying to get the fetal alcohol issue more systemic in their system.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is really training people, whether they are social workers, counselors, medical, allied health, comfortable with the idea of having those difficult conversations. Yes. And, having read your papers, you spoke very well to how do I want to say this? Having 2 masters, right? You have to speak sensitively to the parent in order to keep them engaged so that you can make a difference for them. And yet you also have to open their eyes to help them understand the risks and everything else. And that's very difficult to do. And as far as like allied medical and allied health, having people become more aware of the power of their words. If you say to someone, well, you didn't drink during pregnancy, did you? Of course you didn't. No woman is going to say, well, as a matter of fact, because they heard the unspoken message, I don't have time to go down that trail, tell me no.
Yeah.
And, they are difficult conversations.
But,
and there is an easy roundabout, right? Tell me what life was like in the months leading up to when you discovered you were pregnant. How did you cope with stress? What was going on? And you identify the women like the one that you talked about.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that would have been the kind of in the CPD, the full days training that we would. I remember doing role play of a birth mom and a social worker having that conversation in my training in Dublin. So, but again, I suppose my concern, and if the system is going to endorse awareness training rather than skill-based training, you and I know that if I put up the neurobehavioral presentation of a child with fetal alcohol, well, you and I know it. That looks like ADHD. That looks like autism. That looks like, all these other
oppositional defiant and all kinds of, the list goes on.
And then it's ACEs, and that's trauma, and that's blah. So that's awareness training is not going to.
It's not enough.
Deeper on what the needs of these kids are and how to present. And I think that is one of the difficulties. That was potentially, when people evaluated my full days trainings and saying it should be 2 days, they wanted the time to explore what is exactly an FASD profile. What is? Now, I kind of talk, and I think you probably read in my work now, I'm concerned that the child welfare system is dealing with an explosion of neurodisabilities. Yeah. So how is a social worker to figure out what's what? Yeah. I talked to you when we met originally about Mengs syndrome, a copper deficiency in pregnancy, which is a new genetic code. But Mengs syndrome, very similarly, can look like FSD because it's a neurological, it affects the brain. It has an odd profile in that the hair is very wiry and they don't have strong hair. But again, that can translate over to fetal alcohol, etc. So this is again,
and that is such a minute detail that can be easily overlooked.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, it kind of goes back to that, people might not like my 5-step model because genetics is the first step.
Well, let's talk about your model. So step one is getting genetic testing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because again, just as I've just said, we are dealing with an explosion of neurodisabilities. And you have to understand what you're dealing with before you start intervening and providing services. Otherwise, you send these kids down the wrong service structures, and it doesn't work. And I think the genetic screen is kind of, it's vital. Now, there's a problem with it here in the US because I believe the insurance model doesn't like genetic screens, blah, blah, blah. I think there's 1,800 geneticists in the US. I wonder, does the private sector have a scape? Because in my paper, I talk about you're only looking for one panel, the panel of intellectual disabilities. That's the only screen you're doing. You're not screening for who's the birth parent, who's the dad, you're screening one panel. And I think that the private sector has a potential to come in there and to be able to do that one screen at a reasonable cost. But I think it's vitally, vitally important that we do that screen because the risk to misdiagnosing is so great because of the level of neurodisabilities that are presented in the system. And we have to, and I got challenged on LinkedIn because I used the word disentangle. We have to disentangle all these presentations to try and ensure that we're given the correct intervention. And someone challenged me to say, why do you need to disentangle? Why do you need to disentangle? And I'm thinking, is that person telling me that all neurodisabilities has the same need? And therefore, a single service will do all of those neurodisabilities. And whereas I think you and I know,
I had a gut reaction to that when you said that you got pushed back. Why do we have to disentangle? Because FASD is not typically welcome in the neurodiversity space.
Oh, yeah.
Why? Because it is perceived to be self-induced, right? It has a known cause. Therefore, it is not real. It is not worthy of sympathy, empathy, support, blah, 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 which, will give many people, not just me, a gut punch, like, well, where are we victim blaming now? Because no child chooses to have anomalies in their physical, neurological development. No child brings that upon themselves. No, I'd say very few parents, if any, ever do that consciously, purposefully. Women drink during pregnancy all the time before they suspect or know that they are pregnant. So you can't blame the moms for using a legal substance before they even know that there's a reason for risk. I mean, and that whole, it's not genetic. This over here, this is genetic, so it's no fault of their own. Well, or is it, or how much of it is environmental?
Yeah. ADHD doesn't have a genetic code, and it's invisible, but it's totally accepted. Yeah. I think autism, they're very, very close to, the Stanford group are very, very close to defining a genetic code for autism, which will be a major step forward. But this notion that you have to have, it has to be genetic, no. Yeah. And I do get frustrated with the pushback, because I think, I read the last cost burden paper of 10 billion a year on our health system. And that was Johansson in Canada who wrote that paper. And I'm thinking, those people are pushing back, are paying for fetal alcohol. They're paying in their taxes. They're paying in their public health budgets. Mm-hmm. They're also paying. We have over half a century research. They've paid for that research. Mm-hmm. Why aren't we implementing? Yeah. What are the barriers to implementing? And do we just keep researching and not implementing?
Thank you.
Keep the cost burden climbing. Yeah. So I kind of say to anyone now that wants to challenge my approach or my advocacy for child welfare, I'm going to say, well, listen, you're paying 10 billion a year, and you have funded half a century research. So please go away and read some,
You're right. And I don't know that there's only one cause of any of these disorders.
Yeah.
Right? Who's to say that there's only one cause of autism? It could be genetic is a big piece of it, but who's to say that there aren't environmental causes also? Yeah. In ADHD, according to Dr. Ira Chasnoff, the number one cause of ADHD is prenatal exposure to nicotine and tobacco.
Yeah.
And yet they are welcomed in the neurodiverse space.
Yeah. So, but that piece from Ira Chasnoff is not acknowledged in that space. Yeah. So, and this is where we go around in a circle, and I think kind of thing of things. But
so what's step 2 in your model?
Yeah. So So step 2 on the model is, let me think now, my head is gone. A child behavior checklist. Yes? Yeah. A child behavior checklist is a tool that's been around since the cows come home. And it's $2. And I'd love to see every social worker in a DCYF or whatever administering child behavior checklists, because they do give you, as a clinician in practice, I was gobsmacked. That's a very European gobsmacked, but I was gobsmacked by the data that I could get from a $2 screen, a paper screen that tells me, is this child internalizing? Are they externalizing? What are the kind of key issues? Can pick them up. That's step 2. Step 3 and 4 then are reversible, because my argument with the model, and I think I talk about it in the paper, is that if the child behavior checklist tells you that they're internalizing, then I go for the DREF next, step 3, which is the DILIUS rating of executive functioning. If the child is externalizing on the child behavior checklist, I go for the adaptive behavior, which is the
ability to navigate life.
Yeah, it's the day-to-day, it's the violent, it's violent 3. Now, again, I've had some pushback, because people are saying to me, why are you using violent? 1974, it's been with us as a tool to measure adaptive behavior. And then they said, why are you using DREF? 1995. And again, I say, Patti, I'm a little worried about the whole area of child development at the moment. We are getting smothered with tools to measure. I will say, and I think the paper says it, those tools are validated. They've stood the test of time.
Yes.
They are solid tools.
Yes.
In the spectrum, in the field.
Yeah.
And I think I read, for my PhD, I probably read 100,000 papers. I just read. The 2 things that keeps coming up in the fetal alcohol research is adaptive and executive functioning. And I'm saying, wait a minute, we have these very good tools here that measure that. Why aren't we using them in the fetal alcohol space? Yeah. And that is the core of my argument. Yeah. I'm trying to kind of be more pragmatic. I'm kind of say, listen, because I would argue that the 5 steps are all in your service. They're in your community. You can do this. The one thing I ask about the 5-step model is that incremental, that you would start with a genetic screen. Yeah. But if you can't get the funding, at least do the executive and the adaptive functionings, because then you'll see. I did an adaptive functioning for he was 15.9, so nearly 16 in the education system. He was drifting out of the education system rapidly, and he was already in the juvenile justice involvement. I did a Vineland, and it clearly demonstrated that this kid was probably around 9 years of age. Yeah. But 32 pages, I bring it to the school, and the school did not know where to put themselves, because they had been pushing this kid to the back of the class. Yeah. Yeah. Stay out of trouble. Stay there. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I pushed it for an IEP. My colleagues at work were kind of laughing at me that I would get an IEP for a 15.9 years old, but I did get it. I got it because the functional assessment said this kid was in need. Yeah. And this again comes back to what I'm saying to caregivers out there that are struggling, that are chasing into a rabbit hole looking for a diagnosis. Try the functional assessment piece while you're chasing. Yeah. At least look at the child's needs, because I'm sorry, diagnosis will not address need. Right. It's a piece of paper. It says you have this and blah, blah, blah. But where is the needs? Now, I know from dealing with caregivers, it's the morning routine. It's the education system. It's the diet. It's the sleep. It's the behavior. It's the impulsivity. It's all of these things that caregivers are dealing with. Yeah. Yeah. The sporadic mastery. Yeah. And I'm saying, unfortunately, I recommend the model because I'm saying that it's stunning the data that you get from them.
Yeah. So how can a parent who's watching this podcast get this done?
Well, I think it's a good question, Patti, because obviously I do it at the moment, right? But I've just kind of in the podcast said I've been in fetal alcohol now for 15 years. Mm-hmm. So I'm what I think I'd like to call FASD informed.
Just a bit.
Just a bit. When I get these assessments back, I tend to write a 2 to 3 pages synopsis so that the caregiver, it's in plain English, so that the caregiver clearly gets what it's saying. Because sometimes, assessments can be a little heavy with statistical numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
So I do that. I think that, and that's my little worry about maybe saying to parents. Now, I'm aware that a medic is using my model, and the medic is doing the assessments from a medical lens. No, this is a social model, and it needs to be done through a social lens. And I think so for caregivers trying to maybe get an adaptive and executive functioning, I would stress that they try and find a professional that is willing to understand that the child may be fetal alcohol. So, because again, the vast majority of children will be suspected fetal alcohol.
Yeah.
And if the professional is saying that I don't really understand that, well, give them some research, direct them to some research. If they're a psychologist, there's a lot of good psychology research in Google Scholar. If they're a licensed mental health therapist, there's a lot of mental health research in Google Scholar. So there's no reason why professionals shouldn't know what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I do think that, that concept of doing the assessment, yes, but at least breaking it down into plain English so that caregivers can understand. And indeed, in that case, I just explained, I broke it down with the child himself and I talked to him about it. Now, he has a diagnosis of ADHD. He is, in my book, clearly suspected NDPAE. The adoptive mom has knowledge of birth mom, and there was a lot of drug and alcohol use. So she is absolutely no problem with the fact that I'm talking NDPAE.
Yeah.
But he was undiagnosed or undetected in that assessment process. Again, it goes back to what I just described earlier about Nicholas Cruz but I'm picking this one up. I'm getting the school on board. I'm getting the IEP on board. I'm getting the juvenile court on board because of functional assessments.
Yeah.
Because now I know that many caregivers are out there and they probably are shouting blue murder at various people and saying, I want this, I want this. I'm saying to you, so much better to go with a report and say, this is my child. I need some help.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can't reject a tool that has been a bedrock of the US system. Vineland has been around since 1974.
Yeah.
You reject it, that's crazy because why put them out there? So I say to people, I'm registered with Pearson Clinical, and I do my assessments through Pearson. I can do assessments from virtual because it's email. I don't necessarily have to meet directly with the child, but I make that assessment when the assessment comes in. But quite often these assessments is I'm sending out an email to the parent, sending an email to the school, and if the child is old enough, I'm sending an email link to the child, and they're putting in their data, and then the system is analyzing that and giving me a report.
Yeah. So this is done through Pearson. What about Pearson's client base? Do they serve nationally, or do they only serve the state that you're in?
No, Pearson Clinical. Pearson is all over the world. So the Pearson UK, Pearson USA, Their platform in which I do the clinical is called Q Global. You have to, as a clinician, you have to be registered with Pearson and Q Global in order to access the assessments and to access the reports. So that is, again, a way forward. But again, Patti, there'll probably be many clinicians out there that will tell me, oh, I do adaptive and I do executive. I think I say in the paper, I don't care what tool you use, do these assessments with the lens of fetal alcohol, with the lens of undiagnosed, undetected, and support the caregivers that way. So, but I don't know. I'm saying, in terms of the families that have connected with me, in terms of the reports that I've generated for them, I think the 2-3 pager is vital to break it down.
Yeah.
But those families have been amazingly thrilled.
Yeah.
And it's thrilled because for the first time, they're seeing something in black and white.
Yeah.
And they can go now and they can argue and argue successfully with school boards, with IEP processes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that's what functional assessments. But I think, again, from going back to the beginning of the podcast, if we are just going to hang everything on diagnosis, we're missing this. We're missing this completely.
I think that's the difference between a diagnosis and a label.
Yeah.
Right? Label is when you get the diagnosis and nothing else.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. A diagnosis should always come with the practical, what this means, what's going to help.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm frustrated with clinicians who are diagnosing fetal alcohol and not informing the child welfare system, because I think every clinician that diagnoses should, for a child under the age of 18, whatever, there should be a report going to the child welfare system to say this child has been diagnosed. So to somehow flag up that this child is going to be in need of services, But again, I think that there's a poor understanding of the issue of services. Yet I'm saying to you, Patti, 15 years talking to caregivers, to adoptive parents, to social workers, whatever. And they're isolated. They're looking for holy grails in the system.
Well, and part of that is our society is so accustomed to chasing that quick fix. They want things solved without putting in the work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They want the end result without the process.
Yeah.
And and that's to our collective detriment.
And I say again that maybe that, there's some angst because diagnosis is step 6, but I'm saying, that really steps 1 to 5, the 5 is the multidisciplinary meeting bit to make a decision what the kid needs. None of those steps label the child.
Yeah.
These are just functional assessments. We're not giving them a label. We're not saying they're this, they're that, or the other. We're just trying to measure their adaptive and their executive functioning so that we can plan the best way.
What are the needs and what services can be put in place?
Yeah. And I'm saying we have the tools. We need to be using them. And I hope that people can respect the work I've done. I'm hoping that they can understand that there's a whole raft of children out there in our systems that are undetected, undiagnosed, and will never get diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I'm wanting to put out that model to prevent a Nicholas Cruz scenario. Yeah. Because I think if Nicholas got my assessments in 2016 when he was in the DCYF, I would like to think that could have been prevented. What happened? Now, it's horrendous what happened. Yeah. But again, let's not talk about it. We don't talk about it. And in fact, I know that a lot of people in the FSD world don't want to talk about that because they don't want FSD to be seen that way.
Right. Well, and I think because it's something that people would glob onto and then always associate, the worst outcomes without without the awareness of or appreciation for the fact that most people with FASD are function at a better level than that.
Yes. Again, it's mild to severe.
Yeah.
But again, I think our child welfare system, and we are graduating those children into the juvenile justice system, into the homeless system, into the mental health system, because we're not acknowledging them.
Yeah. That school to prison pipeline.
Yes. Yeah. But I again would say that the model, applying it to that cohort, could dramatically change that trajectory around,
Yeah. So let me ask you this, if I can get you to tease your brain a little bit. What are your thoughts toward those in the audience who are adults living either with, either knowing or suspecting that FASD might be part of their life story, or who just have always struggled with things being challenging, yet that seems so easy for most people?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, Patti, I mean, obviously, something like Vineland as an adaptive behavior I think it's not 99. You can do that as an adult and do a Vineland assessment, etc. Have one done. In terms of adults, again, there is no easy answer to that, because I think again, with this mild to severe piece, that there's quite a number of adults that can manage, because I do believe now, again, 15 years of fetal alcohol work, I've seen a lot of narratives. I've seen a lot of change in the process. Now, there's a narrative out there that, oh, well, the kids grow out of it. No, I don't think the kids grow out of it. I think there's a couple of things that happen. One is that the kids go into such a negative trajectory. So they go into juvenile justice and into the criminal justice system. So that's how they grow out of it, is they disappear in there. The other part of where they grow out of it, I think, if you accept, Patti, what I said there about the young man of 15.9 coming in at 9 years of age, that when he gets to 18, he has a better ability. So when he's 18, he's going to be, let me think, 9 years on 9, so 9 years on 15, he's going to be 23 in real terms, chronologically. But I think by the time he gets it, he's going to have a lot more ability to manage and to care, because he's going to figure out what works for him and what doesn't work for him. And I think that's where a lot of adults master their own disability, by understanding it within a society that doesn't. So they find the employment systems that work. Yeah. They may want to work night shifts because they want to sleep during the day, whatever. They find. I worked with a kid that went off to the army because he wanted regimented. He wanted to be told where to go and when to do it. And so the army was his choice.
Yeah, provided him the structure.
Yeah, the structure, the routine, the repetition. That's what he wanted. And so, again, I think, so that's what I'm saying. The answer to your question is difficult. Yeah. Because as every child is unique in their presentation, so too will every adult be unique. But I think that many adults can find their own pathway out of years of struggling with it. They can find a pathway that works for them. But at the end of the day, there is adult diagnostic systems out there. I know there was one in Canada doing a lot of work. There is a lot of adult literature, like your own work, etc., that is out there for adults to guide. But I do think that many individuals with fetal alcohol get to a point in adulthood where, again, if that chronological developmental piece, as they get older, they get more into the chronological place where it's society, because one of the problems for this, Patti, is society is very judgmental on children. Yes. They must do this, they must do that, whatever. again, doesn't work for this. But when they turn 18, society says, on you go now, on your bike. You can figure it out your own way now. We're not going to tell you. And sometimes for the fetal alcohol case, that can be the best thing they can hear, because they've been fed up being told to fit a square peg in a round hole kind of concept,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know if that really answers your question. So,
well, I want to just thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous with your time. I know you have a lot going on today with summer session wrapping up. And I am excited to get this out there for the audience. I love these conversations that just kind of wind their way through the nuances of the challenges of FASD. So thank you so much for.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure. And again, I'm saying, Patti, I thank you for kind of acknowledging my work. I do worry sometimes because, I suppose all my publications to date have a very Irish flavor. And I kind of said there, Ireland has a little bit of a problem in this area. Yeah.
But even I think so much of that, though, is also replicated here in terms of the American love affair with alcohol.
Yeah.
It's part of it's part of the fabric of our society. People have to justify why they're not drinking at events, right?
Yeah.
It's used for celebration, it's used for mourning, it's used for anger, it's used for as a social lubricant. Alcohol and sex go together, right? It's so embraced. And people don't want to look under the hood and see how toxic it is.
No, and unfortunately, I think we know in the adult context that what alcohol does and the impacts it has on health.
Yeah.
But we have a blind spot in understanding what that might be doing to a fetus in utero. And it's the same teratogen effect, whether it's in the adult life or in the fetal,
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
except
I don't know.
The adult can clear it in a few hours and the baby can't.
No, that's the big issue.
Yeah.
But listen, I kind of, and I kind of say to social work out there, I know that it's tough on the front line at the moment. There's real challenges in child welfare system. And I know that asking you to see the invisible is probably a bit of a challenge. Yeah. But I'm asking you to read Capturing Invisibility, the paper that I published in 2023, and to maybe push it up in your system to the corporate leader.
So, you know what? I will put a link to that in the show notes.
That'd be great.
So that any practitioner watching can click on that and get that. And I would also like to put a link to the organization that you do your testing with, since it's worldwide.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get some more clients.
Well, but I say I'm happy to talk to any caregiver. I'm happy to talk to any social worker that's struggling out there. Yeah. Because I understand the struggle. I've been treading these boards for 15 years now. I'm frustrated that we're still struggling. That's what my frustration is. Yeah. So anyway, listen, I'll let you go.
As one of the women who reviewed my book wrote that at a conference years ago, the guest speaker approached her at the table and said, we've known facts about FASD for decades. It's the stories that move the needle, that get people to act.
But I think the stories is good, but I think, that we need systemic actions rather than individual actions. I know there's good social workers out there that are pushing the needle, but they're doing it at a cost. Yeah. Because the system is not pushing the needle with them. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yes, I nudge, but it has to be systemic in terms of the response.
Because we only have so many fingers to plug the holes in the dike, right?
But anyway, listen, I'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for spending time with us this week on Living with FASD. I hope you found today's episode to be very helpful. Dr. Curran's kind enough to share the links that you will need if you want more information on getting an assessment or reading more about his 5-step model or any of the other articles and things that he has written. So be sure to check out the show notes. I'd also very much appreciate it if you like the episode, if you share the episode with others, and if you subscribe to the channel upon which you're watching Living with FASD. All those things help other people find the podcast. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time for another candid conversation.